And that's when I had my moment that, my God, this worked. I'm better. This is what normal feels like. It was the first time that I could remember, I know in over 20 years, that I didn't have to remind myself to take a deep breath.
I'm Insoo, the director of the Center for Life Sciences at the Museum of Science. Today, my guest is Victoria Gray, the very first person ever to receive a CRISPR therapy for sickle cell disease. We talked about her experience living with this disease, how gene editing helped make her symptom-free, and really difficult questions around access and affordability of this amazing therapy. What was your life like before you got the treatment in the context of the clinical trial? You had a disease called sickle cell. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that's like what happens when you have a disease like that?
Well, with sickle cell being a blood disorder where my red blood cells would be misshapen and cut off the oxygen supply to my organs and tissues, the result of that for me was chronic fatigue and, most of all, chronic pain, which made my life horrible, honestly. From childhood to adulthood, it was something that I lived with and I thought was normal, actually, because it's hard for me to remember a life at all without pain. My earliest memory is pre-K, so 4 years old, just a kid wanting to come home and play with her best friend, but go into the house to change my clothes, and then it's like lightning hit me. I get this severe pain that goes straight down one of my arms, across my chest, down the other arm, and then my entire body was covered in pain. And that day ended with me having to go to the hospital and be in the hospital for over a week, dealing with severe pain where I couldn't even get out of bed. And some of the strongest pain medications, like morphine at the time, wouldn't even take the pain away.
So this is a genetic disorder, and you were born with it. How old were you when you sort of realized there's something going on with my body? You must have been pretty young.
I received my diagnosis at 3 months old, had my first crisis at 3 months old. So I was very familiar with pain my entire life. So
there's no, other than the intervention you went under, there's really no known cure for this disease other than the experimental one that you underwent. What typically is like the treatment for this? Like, what do people normally get as a medical intervention?
Well, normal interventions when I would have a crisis start off at home, just trying to get ahead of it with oral pain medicines and drinking more fluids. But when that wouldn't work, I would have to go inpatient. And that regimen was IV fluids, blood transfusions, and narcotic pain medicines just over a few days and sometimes weeks. And as I got older, those weeks turned into months.
Is there anybody else in your family who has sickle cell?
I only know of one distant cousin. But when I was growing up, it was just me. It was lonely for me. But now I do have two cousins who still have the disease that's younger.
Yeah. And prior to the experimental treatment, did you get to know and meet other sickle cell patients?
No, not really. I grew up in a small town, and we didn't have a huge sickle cell population. And the closest clinic was in Jackson, and that's about an hour away from my home. So I will only.
Okay, so you're in Mississippi?
Yes, in Jackson, Mississippi. So I will only meet other patients in passing, but we're in crisis, so none of us really trying to have a conversation.
Yeah. So growing up with this disease, what were some things that you really wished you could have done but you couldn't because of your condition? Like how did it limit you?
Where do I start?
Yeah.
I would have loved to have had a normal childhood like other kids, go outside and play for hours. I would only be able to get like 30 minutes at a time before I would have to take a long break.
Wow.
And I couldn't participate in PE. So the dreams of wanting to be a cheerleader, wanting to play basketball, I couldn't do any of those things. So I felt like sickle cell robbed me of my childhood.
Did other kids that you were growing up with that you were in school with, did they know what was going on with you?
At first, no. They really didn't. All they knew was that I would be gone from school for a few weeks, come back, have lost weight, but I would try to just jump back into my normal routine. But about fifth grade, one of my teachers asked, could she share with my classmates what was going on with me? And I agreed, and they understood more than what I expected them to.
Did you find that it was hard to make friends when you were younger?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't hard to make friends, but it was hard to spend that social time with my friends. So I did have a best friend, like I said, growing up that lived next door. So she understood. We could play when I wasn't fatigued, but some days she would come over and ask my grandmother, could I play? And I couldn't because I would be too weak or had just gotten out of the hospital.
And then did your condition interfere with your studies?
Yes, it did. A lot of times I would be in the hospital a week, 2 weeks, so I would get behind in school. But while I was in pediatric hospital, I had social workers and nurses that was willing to help, and teachers were more understanding and sent over work to help me stay up. But it was difficult trying to play catch up all the time.
And growing up, and even recently, like, what were your hopes for yourself? Like, what did you hope could happen?
My biggest dream was to become a doctor, but that got cut short. And then I decided to try to do nursing, and then that got cut short. So I really gave up on dreaming after I had this huge crisis that put me in the hospital for 3 months, and I had to go through rehabilitation just to learn to stand on my legs again. Wow. So before CRISPR came along, I had given up on dreams at all.
How did you hear about this clinical trial? How did you get involved from the very beginning?
My answer for that is through prayer. I had been in the hospital. I had heard about a haplotransplant, and I had a crisis. And this time I was in the hospital with the strongest of pain medicines, ketamine and Dilaudid at the same time being pumped into me, but still in some of the worst pain of my life. And I called in my care team, the head of the hospital, and I asked them about that treatment. And no one there at that hospital had heard of any types of treatment for me. But I went home and I went into prayer. And I just asked God to send me something that would allow me to live long enough to see my kids grow up. And less than 30 days, my hematologist said a doctor from Nashville reached out and to see if she had any patients that would be interested in a bone marrow transplant. So I met Dr. Hadar Frangul, and we discussed a bone marrow transplant with my brother. And while undergoing testing for the transplant, I had a crisis while in Nashville at his clinic. Ended up inpatient, and because he knew I was afraid of graft versus host disease, when the CRISPR study was about to begin, he asked me what I thought about it and gave me that option.
What did you think about it when you first heard about it?
When he first told me, he said that I would be the first patient. So that was scary, hearing that. But my question to him was there a chance of graft versus host disease? That was my biggest fear with bone marrow transplant. And when he told me no, there wasn't a chance of graft versus host disease because the cells would be my own. And then my second question was, if this didn't work, would I still have the option to do a bone marrow transplant? And when he told me yes, after a year, if it didn't work, I really knew then that this was the treatment for me.
You mentioned your concerns about graft versus host disease. Can you explain just briefly what that means?
It's when you receive cells from a donor and then your body don't recognize it and your immune system starts to attack those donor cells. So Dr. Frangul explained that it would be like having lupus. And that's why I was so afraid of that.
Yeah, so the graft is coming from the donor, you're the host, and the graft versus host disease means that they're fighting each other.
Yes.
Right. As best as you can remember, how did they explain what was going to happen to you? Kind of like, how did they explain that process? Because it's kind of complicated.
Dr. Frangul made it simple. He said CRISPR would be like going into a textbook with thousands of words, finding the word that was misspelled and correcting that word without disrupting the story. And so then he goes on to say that it would turn on the switch for my body to start creating fetal hemoglobin again. And with that high production of fetal hemoglobin, it would hopes to cut down my crisis to at least 50%.
For several years, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of hype around stem cell treatments. Did that ever get on your radar? Did you ever pay attention to some of that?
Yes, when I was in college and we had to do our research paper, I chose to do my research paper on stem cells. I read about the hopes of what it would do, what it could do for HIV and regrowing limbs for soldiers and regrowing organs. There wasn't anything about curing sickle cell at the time, but during my research, I felt that if stem cells could do something this great, maybe one day it would be something there for me, that it could possibly cure my disease. I just had that hope in college.
Well, stem cells are used in some way in the treatment that you're talking about for sickle cell, because they'll take the blood-making stem cells out of your bone marrow, isolate them and make a genetic modification to them, and then return those cells back to you with that correction. So they'll kind of knock out sickle cell mutation and return it back. So your stem cells did actually save your life after they were modified.
Yes, they did. And I realized that that moment became full circle for me. That hope in college really became my reality later. To be the first, that just blew my mind.
So after this experimental treatment with CRISPR, what was it like when you woke up the next day? What was it like when you recovered?
Well, it took some time. After I received the new cells and I was inpatient, and I finally got to come home. So about 6 to 7 months after I received my new cells that I love to call super cells, I woke up one day, and that day the room felt extra bright that morning. And I sat up in bed and I felt nothing. I thought I was dead. So fear rushed over me immediately. I started to pinch my face, pinch my thighs, and I said, oh, I can feel that. But I still wasn't sure that I was alive. So I had to call my 3 children in the room. They rushed in. I was like, Mom, what's wrong? I was like, nothing. I just want to see you. Can you give me a hug? So I still needed to know that they could feel me. And I sent them out. And that's when I had my moment that, my God, this worked. I'm better. This is what normal feels like. It was the first time that I could remember, I know in over 20 years, that I didn't have to remind myself to take a deep breath. My breath was going down clear without restriction. The pain that I had lived with, which was my normal, the pain that resonated in my lower back and in my hips, it was gone. My knees wasn't stiff. I just couldn't believe the difference.
So you never knew until then what feeling healthy felt like.
No.
That's amazing. And we just take that for granted, people who don't have sickle cell disease. Tell me what's next for you. I mean, what now with this kind of new lease on life, and, are you doing things that you've always wanted to do? Like, how has your life changed?
Life is completely different. My dreams have transitioned. I've always wanted to be someone who helped other people. That's why I wanted to be a doctor. But now my goal is to help people that's still suffering. I remember how lonely that place was when I was sick and could only go from the bed to the couch to the bed day to day, and needed assistance with even taking a bath. So I know that there are still people out there with sickle cell disease that have that life. And I want to be that light to help bring them out. That's why I go and speak, because I want to be a part of that change that I wished and longed for as a kid. And even as an adult, I wanted that journey to be over. I wanted help. I wanted someone to help me find my way out. But I didn't have that. So I want to be that for other people, not just with sickle cell disease, but with rare diseases, for people who feel cast out and forgotten. So that's my mission right now, just to advocate, to use my voice and to show up and help other people as much as I can.
So being the first person in a clinical trial to get a CRISPR therapy for sickle cell, my big question for you is, what do you think should be done to make this more available to more people?
One issue right now is the cost. I can't imagine covering that cost. I wouldn't have been able to.
How much was it? How much would it be?
$2 million for one treatment and $3 million for the other. It would take my entire lifetime to even imagine coming up with the money to cover that cost. So that's one barrier right now is price. And another barrier for me is the places that's offering the treatment, how doctors see the patients in the first place, the stigmas that come along with sickle cell disease. So that's another barrier where patients, if they don't trust the doctor because the way they was treated when they were in crisis, how can they trust them with something as new as gene editing?
Did you experience problematic treatment by physicians in your experience?
Yes. Once I transitioned into adult care, treatment was difficult. When I would present into the ER, the first thing people would think was that I was drug seeking because of the amount of medication that I required just to take the edge off, honestly. But they didn't see that I had lived with this disease my entire life. So, of course, 1 milligram of morphine that helped me as a 4-year-old is not going to help me when I'm 30. So because I needed more medicine, I was judged for that. And it was unfair to me that the people that were supposed to help me were really hurting me because a lot of them didn't hide it. They would say that, oh, I feel sorry for you sicklers because now you can't tell the difference between withdrawal and a pain crisis.
How did you deal with that?
It caused me to go into a depression, honestly, where I would stay home a lot of times when I really needed help. And it would be close calls by the time I got to the emergency room, dealing with infections in my port where I didn't get believed. And by the time after they got tired of me coming into the ER and asking for MRI, it was almost too late for me. I had to have an emergency surgery and even go home on antibiotics with an open wound in my chest just because I wasn't believed. So it was difficult. It caused me to go into a dark place where I almost gave up hope. And honestly, got to the point where I was praying for death because I didn't feel any help was coming for me. If it wasn't for my children, I don't know where I would be.
So from what you're telling me, because, this is a disease that predominantly affects African Americans or persons of African descent, there's a lot of, I think, prejudice and stigma getting in the way of people getting the care that they need. Tell me about some of your advocacy work. Like you seem to be really passionate about kind of addressing those types of problems. Tell me more about the work you're doing.
Well, now I travel to different businesses and I attend conferences. I speak to care teams and scientists about the disparities, my personal journey, just in hopes of changing minds and getting rid of some of that stigma that's attached to sickle cell warriors. Because I feel that I would be heard more now that I don't need the fentanyl patch or the lauded. Since I don't have to deal with it, I need them to understand that the pain is real, and when we come, it's an urgent matter because we really don't want to be there. So my work now is just doing that full time, and recently I joined a team with Alan Anderson with Summits for Sickle Cell to do a climb in Colorado.
Wow.
To go up a mountain to help sickle cell patients in Africa get basic medications like hydroxyurea, which has been around in the U.S. for years, and genetic screenings so families can know what they're dealing with early, so to prevent children dying early in Africa.
Wow. So in addition to you actually having to climb the mountain of your disease and overcome it, you're literally going to be climbing a real mountain. If you had a person with sickle cell disease sitting across the table from you right now, what would you tell her?
I would tell her, don't give up. Even if gene therapy isn't your treatment of choice, there will be something else. Just don't give up. You're stronger than you think.
Well, Victoria, thank you so much for spending time with us. This is just an amazing story, and I'm really glad that you were able to share it with us.
Thank you.